On a serious note, welcome back to Flip the Stock Market. We've got a big one for you today. We've got a new co-host, but we wanted to kick it off by quickly just giving another shout out and like sort of moment of gratitude and appreciation to Tans, who, like we said in our post, is stepping away for a little bit, has to handle some stuff IRL that are going to require his full attention. But we love him. We respect him. He set up this show. He was the coordinator. He's done so much for SPX. And we will be very excited when the time is right and he is back. But in the interim, we wish him the best of luck with that. And we have Ebie stepping in as a co-host. Many of you probably know him as EbMD. He's a doctor by trade. He's a deep thinker, an Aeon, the works. And he's been in SPX for, what has it been, like a year and a half now? Or is it longer than that?
About a year and a half, yeah.
Year and a half. Okay, amazing. We're super excited to have him. We'll give him a moment to sort of, I guess, introduce himself more formally. He's also a Reels and TikTok master, really carrying the boats there. So a lot we can learn from him there. We're going to be talking today about the AI revolution, the second and third order effects. Everybody knows about AI. Everybody is discussing the first order effects, but what comes after that and what comes after that? There's a lot to get into, and our show's a little later than normal, so I wanna just get right into it. But Ebie, I'll give you, like, I guess, 30 seconds or so if you want to sort of introduce yourself a bit more formally. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh no, it's all good. Hey everyone, my name's Ebie MD on Twitter. First name's Ebenezer. I'm like one of the few Ebenezers that I've ever met in my life. I am born in Nigeria, moved to the U.S. when I was 3, grew up in Minnesota, moved around a whole bunch, primarily due to like 2008 financial crisis. So SPX really resonates with me as far as what the mission is. Wanted to be a doctor since I was like very young, and ultimately went to med school in San Francisco. After med school, got to spend some time in Dallas, where I still am. As a neurology resident, really interested in the brain, networks, all that type of stuff. Big into philosophy, big into psychology. I play chess, semi-professional, ELO, like 2100 for those who know. Video games, friends, family, big family, all the things. Excited to be.
What video games you playing?
Oh, my favorite video game, I think, is probably Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 is a really good one. I got completely enraptured with that. I was playing Ark a little bit, but then it's just a little bit too hard to get hit in the face by some camper in the corner. So I said, never mind.
It's the perpetual video game problem. There's always a camper.
Literally. Yeah.
Awesome.
What an intro.
Awesome to have you, Ebie.
Yeah, we're excited you're here. You're going to be able to, instantly, off of just the first of like your 8 accolades, you're going to be able to add a lot.
Hey, the CV is long in this one.
That's perfect. Perfect. Awesome. Well, I know we all did a little bit of research to kick it off. Does anyone have any thoughts they want to lead with? If not, I can share mine. But yeah, does anyone want to take the floor?
Go for it, Cap.
Yeah, go for it, Cap.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I've been thinking, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a graphic that I made for this, but I've been thinking quite a bit about AI and its implications in the workforce for a while. I'm sure like many of you and just most people who either, are fascinated by it or have anxiety from it. I think both routes kind of lead to, a similar place, which is spending way too much time thinking about it. One thing I've been thinking a lot about as a second and third order effect Jeff Park, who is an Aeon, has spoken about a lot. And I think he nails the trifecta of things that are leading into this, part of which is birth rate, part of which is sort of this like perpetual duration issue with assets that are frankly reliant on career progression. They're reliant on human labor as a concept, right? And you can see that in, this like, this has kind of been happening for the last 20, 30 years, but especially recently with some of these proposals, things like 100-year mortgages, like it's very clear that these are sort of last ditch efforts to kick the can down the road to some extent. Bitcoin was sort of like the first alternative sort of potential asset or route that could be used to solve this problem. But it's largely unexplored. And one of the things that I think a lot about is career, because I get a lot of satisfaction out of the work that I do. And largely, you can almost feel it in the air. Like when you watch TikToks or short form videos by young people, and Ebie, like we were talking about before the show started, or I guess it was right when the show started, they actually talk a lot about this in the most recent Into the Cognosphere, but it's very true, which is that the second and third order effect of jobs being taken away is careers being taken away, which also means identity and erosion of some sense of mobility in the economy, as well as like, I guess status, hierarchy, all of these kind of things, right? Being able to sort of put yourself in this career basket. And I went ahead and tried to exemplify this. I'm going to share my screen with a graphic I put together in this massive. I have so many graphics in this in this massive Lucid Spark. But I thought a little bit about it, and very clearly the old form of linear progression is going to break. I think that's pretty hard to defy. I think there's very little work for middle management and management of middle management. That has been a very sound career trajectory for a lot of people. Even if you don't make it to exec, you can have a very strong, good life going to that senior-ish position, depending on the field that you're in. However, one thing that AI is doing is commoditizing execution of things, right? Therefore, instead of having to have some specialized, super, intuitive, well-rounded person in a specific field, be that design, engineering, what have you, I can now get someone who generally understands it, and they can prompt their way into solving the problem. Of course, that's only going to accelerate. And the same is true for blue collar work as it pertains to robotics. But I think where that really leaves us is with kind of two main jobs and then sort of a dead zone, or this like middle area. You could also relate this, I think, to what is like a decaying middle class in a lot of ways, and say that this is sort of a symptom of that. But if I am someone who is capable of doing high level things in running a business, hiring the right people, managing burn, making decisions, contextual decisions, those things are more valuable than ever, because the competition for building a business is increasing rapidly because execution is becoming commoditized. At the same time, you still need people to actually prompt the AI. You still need a means by which this stuff gets done. It's just that who can do the prompt engineering is both narrowing in the amount of people that you need, as well as sort of moving down the specialization ladder. You don't need someone who has 15 years of experience when someone with 3 years of experience and strong prompt engineering experience can do these things. And so, this is just immediate term, but second and third order effects is, from my perspective, that from a career standpoint, that middle zone kind of dies, right? And it gives a big advantage to a really young, hungry entry-level person. And it gives a big advantage to a very smart executive or business owner. But it eliminates a lot of the need for the middle. And I actually have thought for a while that business could move into a more decentralized capacity, i.e., I think something like SPX could be theoretically looked at like a business, right? You have a lot of people who are coming together with a shared mission. It just doesn't have a typical, organizational structure. Nobody's getting paid, but the incentive mechanism is very similar to like a startup or something like that. And I think you could actually see work move in that direction, because people still have the need to influence things, to have been a part of things, to have met people from different periods or eras in their life. And regardless of what happens with jobs, like I know that I'll be a part of SPX in 5-10 years. And a lot of the people and relationships that I have right now, these are in the process of becoming very real parts of my quote unquote network. I don't want to sound like some LinkedIn guy, but like these are people that I talk to, I would ask questions of, that I would potentially hire, vice versa. And so I think that there are really interesting network implications to this, because the means by which our networks were created in the past, I think, are going to unravel very quickly here. So that is one thing that I have been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, Cal, I'll add on some of my thoughts to that. And I'll do it as someone who's spent a lot of time with, let's call them earlier AI primitives and even AI at this point. So going back like 10 years in my career to when I was at Bridgewater, the entire organization was built off of like algorithmic systems, whether it came to like organizational or people management, portfolio management. Like the entire concept of how that organization ran was essentially like trying to accelerate and leapfrog towards this world of, AI, where everything is automated and systematized, because humans are really good at creative lateral thinking. But AI is like much better at like processing information, especially like vast amounts of information, like faster, more comprehensively, and more accurately than humans. And so, like even when I was there, a big part of most people's job there was to automate themselves out of their role, like to literally figure out a way to outsource it to computers. So I recognized the power and leverage behind this process from that very direct experience. And from like an efficiency perspective, if you're talking about like, organizationally, how can you operate the most efficient system or company or what have you, it makes a tremendous amount of sense, I think, up until a point. And the reason I think about this and worry about this is I think the macroeconomic context for when this paradigm shift is occurring matters a lot. And we're at like this point of, like great wealth disparity, as a lot of people in SPX talk about, the largest wealth disparity gap by many measures since like, the times of the Great Depression. This is relevant, extremely relevant, because when you have this insanely high leverage technology for a small number of people, whether they're like the people who are at the top of an organization or the people who are the capital providers, it exacerbates that problem. Like any way you slice it, this is a very, very high leverage, powerful technology, but it means you can do more with less. And so there's a ton of people that are going to be impacted by this transition. And even today, with some of the stuff I'm working on outside of SPX, like I have built some systematic investment strategies for markets, not for SPX, for other things. And that's a game I like to play. It's been a passion of mine for years. And we're honestly also doing more with less. Like I work with a couple of guys in Canada on this stuff, and we've thought about the need to hire additional engineers or people to work on it with us. And we basically said no, because we're able to use this technology in a higher leverage way to get more out of less. So a large part of like my thesis and ultimately what led me to SPX was thinking about, from my own direct experience, how I witnessed and watched AI and like algorithmic systems evolve within organizations. But also part of what led me here was like hedging, and thinking about my own future and thinking about like the other people who are going to get impacted by this, and trying to think like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. Because Murad, I think, put a tweet out about this recently, about like how trading is basically going to be taken over by AI. And I completely agree. And this is something that I thought about when I was back sort of in like my trading seat, thinking about like, oh my gosh, like I've been working my whole life on trying to decode markets and understand some of this stuff. How close am I to be made to like everything that I worked on for the last 10 years being completely obsolete? So all of this is to say, this AI paradigm shift and revolution, it is happening. It is happening no matter what. It is a tidal wave. And I think things like SPX are extremely purposeful and important as a mechanism through which we can create multiple avenues and multiple paths to go down to handle this transition. So for the people who are in roles at companies that are like facing this sort of pressure. I don't think the answer is to say like you've already lost the battle. Like stop even trying. Like that's not the message of SPX here. It's not like this complete doomerism type of thing, but it's saying, hey, like this is a reality. This is a reality that is coming down the pike. This is a reality that we need to prepare for. And something like SPX offers an alternative avenue for people as like a component of how do you navigate this very ambiguous future. And I think that's very important. And I think it's very purposeful. And I think it's worth fighting for because I can't, I still can't quite envision what that is going to look like in the next couple of years. Like I see a world where there's actually like almost like two parallel systems and two parallel games being played at once by different participants. You're going to have these people who have figured out how to utilize and leverage AI in highly impactful ways for themselves. And that's going to be like like a Pareto distribution. Like it's actually going to be like fewer people who are benefiting from that, having very high leverage with these technologies. And then there's going to be everyone else. And it's like, well, what is everyone else going to do? How are they going to navigate this? How are they going to survive? And I think things like SPX are like these really neat emergent opportunities and ways to sort of deal with that, reality that's coming down the pipe. So I'll leave it at that.
Have you heard Jensen talk about these tokens? I was curious if that's something that Cal, you or your Matt have come across, like how these engineers and like giving them this whole like token distribution setup. I thought that was very interesting. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are you talking about like consuming tokens to like when training models or?
Yes. Yeah. And how, really interesting. And essentially what he was saying was like, it starts as like a group of AI agents controlled by like one AI manager. And that's like the beginning. And then they just delegate out work. And then as it keeps going, like his engineers that he's using, like whatever, say their salary is $500K, he's going to give them an extra 250,000 in what he calls tokens that will be spent on these different AI platforms. And basically saying like, if he has an engineer that's only using $10,000 worth of these tokens compared to another one that's using 200,000, like he wants the $200,000 guy because that's how that's where they see this business going. It was fascinating. I was just curious if you're familiar with it.
I am vaguely familiar with it. And I think from my perspective, what this comes down, it's actually directly related to what I just mentioned. Some of the people who are going to be able to play that game successfully are some of the wealthiest people already, because this is a super capital intensive business, like sort of area, right? You need compute, you need tokens. You're going to have to, pay for certain like access to platforms, data sets, products, what have you. And so the people, it's going to be a capital intensive thing, at least initially, you need compute. And it's going to be very difficult for regular people, going back to the wealth disparity thing, who have not already amassed a significant amount of capital to compete, or even some individuals who have amassed a significant amount of capital to compete at this game. And I also think like, it's hard to follow along because there's so much stuff happening. And that's also part of why I'm like passionate about SPX. It's like, who wants to literally spend their entire life in front of a computer in like a GitHub repository, like not interacting with their friends and family and living life and trying to keep pace with this stuff when you just get up to date on the latest release and something new comes out. And it honestly just reminds me of like, it's like another iteration of what we saw with pumped up fun token launches and deck screen. It's like, it's actually like not so different. And it's like, then it's like everyone else is spending all this time and losing. And like, there's like one winner per like, 100,000 people. Right.
That's
so
funny.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So when I was looking at this, so it's like, all right, so let's start with like you said, like first order. So how I see this is, so you have forever, right? For decades now, industries are boom bust, right? And that basically goes across all industries, but in particular, you think of like the more capital intensive ones like science, finance, and tech, right? So those are boom bust cycles based on interest rates, right? Which is really just liquidity, low interest rate environment. Companies boom, they borrow the money for free, they hire people. Some of that hiring becomes nefarious in the sense of they overhire just to lock someone up so they can not go work for another competitor, right? But the money is being spent, and then interest rates rise. These companies lay off, 20, 25% of their employees, but under the assumption that it's a cycle, it's cyclical, right? Like say it's they lay off 5,000 people, interest rates are rising. When they come back down, under the assumption that like those, not only are those 5,000 people are going to get hired, but it's probably going to be a couple thousand more than that, right? And that was always based on liquidity. And what I find interesting is I think this AI creates a new catalyst that was not ever there before. And what I mean by that is now you're going to have companies that will start to, we're watching it now, fire people based on AI, whether they're doing AI or not. That's regardless of what's happening with interest rates. Now you have this new mechanism that can dictate what happens to these companies. And I think that that's very new. And what that does is that changes like structural underemployment, not temporary unemployment. You get what I'm saying? That is completely different. Those are two fundamentally different things. So I think that's where it starts, right? I think the way I see it is that's the second order effects of this will be economical in terms of employment, and then like financial investing, people will change the way they invest. But then like third order will be more spiritual and like philosophical, and that's where I think SPX comes in. And I was kind of thinking of what to call it. I think it's like meaning makers, because I think when all of this change happens, right, and people lose their job, they lose their identity, what they're going to be boiled down to, what's left is like what gives them meaning. And I think that's where investing will start to change, right? So like the middle class invests based on capital preservation and low risk, right? Like most people are not trying to just hit a home run. They're just trying to protect their principal, earn more than inflation, right? And then the other side of that would be considered high risk, right? So I think what it's going to turn into is not low risk, high risk, but low risk, high reward. And to me, high reward doesn't have to do with speculation. High reward is going to be something that's more encompassing, right? I think these financial vehicles are going to transcend just finance, right? As AI takes over, I wrote down a couple points. Like they'll encompass like physical presence, emotional nuance, trust, right? Like that's what I mean by meaning makers. Like it's going to take on more than just being a financial investment. And that's where I think SPX falls in, right? Because when people lose hope, they lose identity, community is what's going to be left. People are going to be seeking a purpose. And I really think that's where SPX is positioned very uniquely, because its complete existence is based on community. Community is why it has its value now. It's why it'll have its value in 5 years, in 10 years. And I think that's just, we're early. We're early to that being worth something to the average investor.
Yeah, I think capital like has, gosh, I forget his name. You guys know Adam Smith, the invisible hand, the invisible hand theory, right? I do think capital has this like very unique, almost like a biological organism type of way of finding its way to things of value, over time. And I honestly think, this is a view and a theory and a thesis I have. I honestly think the things that we value are going to start shifting, because when you actually look at where value is like accruing right now, I'm of the opinion that like a lot of value that is accruing to the same places that it's been accruing to over the last, several years, mostly on the basis of like capital flows, like more people keep piling into so it keeps driving it up. I think people are going to start to awaken to the fact that like, we've actually only been allocating to these things because they're making us money, not because we actually value the products and services and things that they're offering us. In fact, in a lot of cases, we don't value them at all. Like we would prefer that they go away. Like I don't, I think like this, and a lot of times like they're being invested, that capital is being invested to like, directly kind of addict people to certain technologies and extract money. Murad talks about like squeezing the juice out of people. Like we've definitely seen that with a lot of like these social media companies and things like this. The endless doom scroll, the nonstop ads, like they're squeezing juice out of you, and you don't even like it, but like it's almost like, yeah, how much time are we all spending on our phones, right? It's like they've figured out a way to get people hooked into this environment, and yeah, so like when you think about it, like I bet you if you went down the street and asked a bunch of people if they actually like these products and services, they'd be like, no. But then I bet you if you ask the same people, like, hey, are you invested in the S&P 500 index fund or something like that? A lot of them would be like, yeah, I am actually. And so they're allocating capital to these companies on the basis of a financial desire, as opposed to a desire for the products and services. And so what I think will happen slowly over time, and this happened with Bitcoin, and I think it will happen with things like SPX over a period of years, is that capital is going to start to rotate and be reallocated towards things that people actually value that can also simultaneously make them money and satisfy sort of the financial component of that. The problem with things like SPX or early Bitcoin, when you're early, is people are like, they're extremely skeptical. They're like, okay, are people serious about allocating capital to this? Or is it just like everything else, that exists in crypto where, people are going to go away? That's why I think it's like really important to walk the walk here with SPX, because like that in and of itself, that is the asset. That is the thing that people are looking for. That is the thing that people value. They value stability. They value a deep holder base that wants what they want, that wants to change the world in some crazy ways, but ways that make sense to them and aren't going to go away. And so like, we have to like look at it from that, like we are the asset and how we behave is the asset. And I think you have to be very intentional about seeing the asset that we all want and recognizing that's the asset that a lot of other people want, and then acting and behaving in a way to deliver that outcome, to make it possible. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's actually extremely hard, but that's like, it's very intentional. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like people want hope and community.
Yes.
Simple. Right.
And stability and predictability.
Really, consistency.
Can I rely on you? Can I trust you? Are you actually serious about this? Or, and I think that's why SPX was appealing to me as opposed to anything else out there, because the density of people who I think share that view that I hold here on this is like the highest that I've seen.
Okay, quick. So I want to take a bunch of what you guys have said and tie it back into the I guess the premise being AI second, third order consequences. I think I agree by and large with what has been stated. The revolutionary nature of artificial intelligence, the impact in my understanding, it's like the impact on agents, human agents, corporate agents, and the dispersion throughout the society essentially immediately. Have any of you guys played the game Plague Inc. before? It's a game, it's like 99 cents you can get it, where the premise of the game is you're a bacteria and your goal is to infect the entire world and then end civilization. That's the game. And you can adjust your severity you can adjust how quickly you transmit between people, how severe your symptoms is, how quickly you unalive someone, essentially, right? In my mind, when I think about artificial intelligence, I think about its effect on like what's the on homos economicus, right? Like I think that's really like we're Homo sapiens, right? But in the capitalistic, hyper competitive world that we live in, we exist as Homos economicus, and AI is a new organism that's essentially able to do the economicus part of the Homos economicus thing. And we've talked about how that will result in a lot of change. The middle manager class, so to speak, the identity removal from having essentially allowing somebody with less experience to be able to do more with less, right? But there's also what occurs from a political standpoint, how governments respond to the rapid shift, right? Because time is essentially when I was thinking about this thought of like what the second order, third order consequence of AI is, in my mind, AI is actually probably like a fourth or fifth order consequence of microprocessors, and it's just essentially the dissemination of intelligent systems through anybody. And I think what you said, Matt, about the K-shaped economy, the haves and the have-nots, and AI essentially being some almost like nitrous to the haves, but not necessarily the haves, but by like financially, but more from like an agentic perspective, because because for like social media, the world that we live in, this microprocessor thing, it's like a mirror to the self, right? And so if you are somebody who is unintentioned, then you in social media will get destroyed, like kind of death by a thousand cuts. Somebody with a lot of intention will make leaps and bounds. To he who has, more shall be given, and to he who has that, even that which he has shall be taken away. I think artificial intelligence as a leverage tool is juicing that perspective. And so when thinking about like, we could there's so, because it's so broad, there's a lot of different ways that you could take it. But for me, the core idea is that of the human in the loop debate. I think that's where the dividing line really is, and where a lot of the, not only like humans, corporations, political entities will need to triangulate to get to a consensus on. Because if if AI can do the economicus part of Homo economicus, what will the Homo sapien do? Like what's going on there? And if the Homo sapien was used to a certain lifestyle, then where do you put the frustration if you are a world leader or somebody who manages large teams? How does that work? Professor, this is the last point. Professor Zhang had a recent video where he talks about three main things, that kind of global trends occurring, from efficiency to resilience, right? COVID being an example, supply chains of pharmaceuticals not being resilient, from materialism to spirituality, primarily due to the geopolitical stressors, the domestic and international challenges with debt, with wars and possible food shortages making materialism harder. Yet folks still have value. Where do they place that value? And then from individuality to community and family, these three trends, ultimately any society, per Professor Zhang, who will succeed will have to solve the question of what to do, how to transfer value from the old to the young in a way that does not result in either outright degeneracy by the young or destruction of the system. And that's why I think SPX is really critical here, because it's a belief set, right? It's a belief system. And if I'm a world leader, if I'm somebody in power and I want to say, okay, I have all of this stuff, all of this value, and I want to make sure that it perpetuates in time, but I want to ensure that the person that I'm picking has good character. And I think from that vantage point, SPX really stands out. But tying it back to the AI piece, it's like, I really like what, I forget who said it. It's like a network, but it's not just a network in current time, but it's a network in like 5 years and 10 years. And in my mind, I think, well, if artificial intelligence is taking the economicest part out, and you have the humans, what are the humans going to do? Well, the humans are going to need to figure out a way to orient themselves. We still have like scripts in our heads, like mythos that we play in our heads. If we could what if one could tie, like make that mythos into realities, like, into something that you can tangibly see, and what SPX is doing is not only doing that, but then it's also adding a cultural belief layer that I think imprints on the mindsets of aeons to adjust and move differently, to optimize for resilience, to optimize for community, and to optimize for spirituality. And essentially, again, because AI is super, because AI is a high leverage thing, if you are not somebody with ordered intentions, it's over for you. And so I think it's like a natural like emergent response to the changing environment.
Totally agree. And when I think back, like in a lot of ways, that we're talking about second and third order consequences of AI, like SPX is one of the direct second or third order consequences of AI. In the same way that Bitcoin was one of the second or third order consequences of the 2008 financial crisis. You can't like have these sort of paradigm shifting things and, poke a hole in the system without something else popping out on the other side. And one of those things that has popped out on the other side, which is like, and in a lot of ways, the second and third order shifts associated with this AI, wave, they're actually happening ahead of the technological shifts. The reason for that is because even the mere perception of a potential reality where they we're all talking about a perception of where this is going, but no one actually knows entirely where it's going. But the perception is enough to start to alter human behavior, to start to alter what's going to happen from here. And so there's this almost like reflexive feedback loop that is happening even before the thing comes fully into existence, which is quite interesting.
It's weird because I actually read a really good book like 2 or 3 years ago called A History of America in 10 Strikes. And it was all about a few eras of labor strikes that changed workforce conditions. And, I guess in some ways it was similar because it's a group of people who, protest a current state that they don't like and fight for something that they think will be better. The means is different, but that's fine. One of the things that's really interesting in that, and that I find so fascinating about all of this, is if you look back, and this isn't that long ago, Industrial Revolution, 150 years ago or so, I mean, there were children working 16 hours a day, 6-7 days a week and dying in the factories, right? Like this was commonplace. And so it's strange because in some ways, if you look objectively, you take the humanity out of it for a second, which I know is 100% not our mission here, but it's better because we are easing the what you could call synthetic burden that each person has to produce something that, frankly, they're objectively probably not as good at producing as some of these things are now. The threat, I think, is more about the world order and a sense of purpose and all of these things we know to be deeply human. And so it begs the question off of your point, Ebie, what is it to be human? What are we looking for, right? Why does this feel like such an existential threat? If that's the case, let's assume that UBI or some sort of the triangular forces that you mentioned earlier come into effect and ensure that you have, the basic necessities to keep you alive, right? Why does it feel like such a threat? It's the fact that labor has been tied to status has been tied to your social class, if you will, and money has also been tied to both of those things. And it feels like, whether it is or it isn't, to your point, Matt, it feels like the door is closing for mobility as it pertains to that stuff, and therefore people are trying to, you know, and as a I guess an argument in favor of the idea that SPX isn't like sort of a preemptive reaction to what AI will create. They're attempting to create their own sort of social systems to help mitigate the blow of what has been a 2000, maybe a little less year sort of labor forward social system.
Yeah, what was that factory? The shirtwaist, the fabric one, right? It was in like 1920 or something, or I think like 100. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. But yeah, like Matt said, Bitcoin was. You always see this where when something goes wrong. This is why I can't stand doomerism. It drives me nuts. But when human nature is anti-fragile, like it is hardwired into our brains to survive, right? So from a financial aspect, like 2008 was Bitcoin, 2020 was GME. You think you get GME without COVID? No shot. No shot. And I feel like this is just the next evolution of that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Emotion precedes like massive outcomes of any kind, right? You need a collective feeling of something. You know, not to minimize like the weight of what you're saying, but you know, it's like sales 101, right? You can't get anyone to do anything.
And honestly, I think this concept of sort of let's call it alchemizing assets, which is like a very real thing, you know, in the last 10, 15 years, you know, maybe Bitcoin was like the first alchemization of an asset that I can recall. But that changed everything. And I think people underestimate how frequently that is going to reemerge and reappear and manifest in different ways. And, you know, Bitcoin it opened Pandora's box. And then, you know, we had Dogecoin, we had XRP, we had ADA, we had Pepe, we had GME. Like we've had these sort of like big alchemizations of assets that large groups of people have banded around without even like this sort of tight-knit shared values that you see in something like SPX or in Bitcoin but that have like, they've clearly happened. And to me, it's surprising to me that some of the skepticism around this concept, like, oh yeah, like that can't, you know, that type of thing can't happen again, or like whatever, you know, because it's happened so many times, and we're intentionally trying to do it again. And there's like a lot, you know, there's people who are involved for very, very, very deep reasons. So I think it's not something people should ignore.
Yeah, I think the other thing is people, they won't understand it until the dollar is in a different position, right? Like especially in America, like people still look at Bitcoin as a joke, like a regular retail person, right? And I think that's because the dollar has been in such a dominant position, right? World reserve currency for decades now. And you're kind of watching that system be stress tested super hard right now. And I think that until that system changes, like until there's an actual fracture in that, will people start to look at crypto as cryptocurrencies? That's the biggest problem with crypto right now. They don't even say the full word, right? They just call it crypto. They trade it like a stock. It's not looked at as a currency. And it's because for right now, it doesn't have to be. Most people that even look at their crypto wallets, it's still priced in their native currency, right? They don't look at it as a currency. They look at it as an investment. And I think that until something happens that forces the person, you know, the masses to change the way they perceive that's just kind of how it's going to be looked at. But do you know what Pascal's wager is? Pascal's wager. It's so it's he was talking about God. Yeah, he was talking about God. Like to believe in God makes more it's more rational. You have more to win than to not to believe it, right? But then you could like apply that to belief, right? To decision making, and it all comes down to belief. And to me, like what I took away from Pascal's wager is like, if you're right, you win everything. If you're wrong, you lose nothing. And I think that's really what it comes down to with this is like, once that, like the belief in SPX that we have now, like as it continues to grow, like it becomes this Pascal's wager where it's like, it makes more sense to just believe in it than it does to not.
I'm just going to quickly put this up on the screen. Keep talking. But
yeah, no, 100% believe that to be true. Anything I've done in my life, I've mentioned this before, anything I've done in my life of substance, I believed in. And I don't think that's like by accident. And when you believe in something, you know, whether it's, let's say you're like an athlete growing up or something, and you believe you're going to be great. And then because you believe you're going to be great, what do? You also acknowledge you have to put in the work. You have to wake up every day, work out, train, what have you. But the belief translates into actions that can then, you know, translate into a reality. And so if you start with belief, you're literally mathematically orienting the outcome more in your favor, right? Like you're tilting the odds towards that reality coming true. And I think that's just, you know, it's so that relates to Pascal's wager, because like, I think what you're describing is something I've internalized based on, you know, my own sort of existence and experiences in life.
Yeah, I tried to sneak this up here, but I made a post on this actually for one of the first there we go, for one of the first flip the stock markets that we did. I tried to apply it to SPX because it's very simple, right? If you DCA some SPX and 6,900 flips to 500, you get all of these things. Wow, like that's amazing, right? You DCA the SPX, or you DCA SPX at 6,900 and it doesn't flip to 500. Okay, maybe you lose a little money, you learn some things, like pretty par for the course. If you don't DCA SPX and 69 flips to 500, I mean, we can't even discuss the level of regret on, you know, spiritual level, financial level, all the things. And then obviously, if you don't DCA the SPX and it doesn't flip to 500, nothing happens. So pretty easy trade-off, right?
Yeah, some of this also relates back. So this is what I'm going to mention is related to what you're discussing. Something that is also relevant about crypto is, have you guys ever read any of Taleb's books where he talks about, you know, Extremistan in markets? Extremistan is like this place where like,
yeah, which one was that? Which book was that's the one I read.
The Black Swan, or like
that's it, Black Swan. That's it.
Something like that. But he talks about how, you know, this concept of Extremistan in markets. He uses it as like this like sort of like conceptual mythical place where the standard bell curve of probabilities is not true. It's like it's very skewed towards certain outcomes, which is where you have like the black swans and the tails. You know, crypto is Extremistan, but it's actually like the outcomes can be extremely skewed to the positive side. You know, on average, they're negative, but you know, if you're right, they're extremely skewed to the positive side. And as someone who's like been involved in the game of risk for a long period of time, I'll often find people who I talk to who think about risk slightly different than I do. They will think about it in the probability that they are right or wrong, and that is one axis or one dimension. The other thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the order of magnitude of the outcome, whether I'm right or wrong? And if you are not pairing those two things together, I think you're not like thinking of risk holistically. But Cal, this is exactly what you're describing, which is like, okay, you know, it's not just about being right or wrong. It's, am I participating in making, you know, tilting the needle to being right or wrong? And also like understanding like, what am I like kind of risking? What am I gaining? What am I losing in these different circumstances? And for me, as a risk person, it's like, there was that old adage in Bitcoin, like get off zero, for so many years, like no one knew the outcome of Bitcoin at that point. But I think the people who were saying get off zero were like, yo, like if this works, it's going to be like a very big outcome. So you're actually taking more risk by not having exposure. So get off zero. Like, I think that was sort of the premise of that idea. I think of SPX as very similar, where from my perspective, I think I think people should get off zero, because I think they're underestimating a phenomenon that is emerging here, that has emerged in other assets historically, that has looked very, very similar to this. And this is also why I love the idea of like there is no chart, because the chart can this can distract you. This can really lead you astray. Imagine you bought Bitcoin at $4 and you watched it go up to 30, and then you watched it go all the way back down to $2. Like, even the best performing assets where this type of thing has happened, that is always part of the journey. So this is why I also love like the total focus on the mission. There is no chart, because and just like a very intentional, like, no, we're doing this. We're doing this.
Right. And real quick, because I think how maybe you have some, we might need to wrap up if I'm not.
Yeah, we have 5-10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So I like what you said, Matt, about Extremistan and getting off zero. I think the same way with SPX, and I think about it not like, because SPX has two tailwinds that are you can't really, that it's hard to wrap my mind around because of how big the tailwinds are. Like, one being artificial intelligence, and then like the two being the network effects of community. And I think that something else I've learned as of late is like, we all think the future is going to be some version of the past, but like a couple more steps, but it's really more exponential. One, but also like because of the internet and microprocessors, it's compressing, like time is compressing, and we're in a scenario where volatility is also increasing, right? And we are in such a sclerotic system. We're not very flexible, and so like for me, SPX, why I laugh when I think about SPX is like, well, I mean, if you're anti-SPX, you're essentially saying crypto is going to become like degeneracy forever, or it's just going to be siphoned to the top like 0.01%, and the rest of folks are not going to do anything about it. But then if you're pro SPX, you're saying like AI is going to be a thing, and we're already seeing the effects of that, and crypto essentially removes a C-suite person from the effect and impact of the network, right? And so it's like it just doesn't, to me, in my mind, when I think about it, I'm like, it just does not make any sense not to own at least a little bit, because eventually once we flip to the world where where we're truly multipolar, and it's not like, oh, I'm investing in this for the fiat in my home country or whatnot, then it's a completely different game. And then who you know matters way more than what you know, if what you know is commoditized and available to everybody.
Yeah, I want to touch on one thing, like that I think is complementary to what you just said, Ebie, that Matt said earlier, which is this idea that like, let's ask first principles questions. Like, why are people buying some of the things that they maybe have been buying for the past 20, 25 years? Let's say, especially in like a post-internet era. I think there are many versions of this, depending on like sort of the tribe or niche that you fall into and care about. For instance, this might look super different for an engineer versus like someone in Miami versus like someone in, I don't know, London or something like that. But realistically, like money beyond basic needs and maybe a little bit extra to satiate hobbies and other things is often used as like a way to extrapolate status and to pronounce it into like the broader world or within like a niche group that you seem either fall into or want to fall into. And it's interesting. I was talking to Murad about this like 6 months ago or something. But if you remove the idea that there is mobility, then you're sort of left with like what is fundamentally human. And what is fundamentally human is still to compete for those same, sort of social hierarchies to some degree. And that forces people further into tribalism to some extent. Like you have to find your group of people and you have to find a reason to belong to them and or, ideally be like in sort of the higher half of those people, like not in a nefarious or malicious way, but just because that's human nature. Like people want to, they want to belong and they want to belong to the best of the best, right? That's why people go through these like competitive games. And that's why also, on a relative basis, like life might be much, much better than say like a king 100,000 or not 100,000, like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but it feels so much worse. And that's because on a relative basis, you might feel trapped and you might feel like there's no hope for you in the immediate future to fit into the tribe that you do want to fit into. And so if you remove money as like a means to buy your place there, and you remove careers as the means to sort of welcome you into those groups, then you have to ask the question, like, how are people going to vie for that status? And I think it becomes a much more social game, which I think in a lot of ways can be really good, right? How much have you contributed to SPX? Like, that could be a world that starts to mean more than how many tokens do I own? And I don't mean that in the literal sense of SPX. I mean that more broadly in like, the world. Instead of how much money do I have and what cool car do I have? If robotics and AI can commoditize intelligence and manufacturing, instead the question might be like, how amazing of a person are you? Like what kind of experiences have you curated? What kind of hope have you provided? Those kind of things.
Yeah, completely agreed. And it's it goes back to the like Adam Smith invisible hand thing, where I think we're actually going to be undergoing a very big shift in terms of the things that we value, quote unquote value, that we allocate capital to. And it's actually going to come back more to the things that we like truly value. So long as there's still like the financial piece is still satisfied.
Yeah, I think you see a deconstruction of a consumer economy based on materialism, whether those people want to participate in that deconstruction or not. That's what
that part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how I think that's how this is going to go. But I think in the end, that is a net positive for a functioning society. You know what I'm saying? Because we have fallen into. I think social media is a good gauge for the temperature of a society. Just the way that people talk to each other on social media, and as you can see, it's not great. So I think that'll be a good thing. Don't get me wrong; there'll be some pain. I think you see inequality widen before it narrows, but in the end, I think what you get will be good. It'll be better for a functioning society.
Any final thoughts from anyone? I know we're a little over. I know you have to run, Maj.
Yeah, son's getting a brown stripe on his belt today, so I got to get that.
Ow!
Yeah.
Impressive.
Oh, dude,
that's a higher belt than myself. So,
dude, he makes like
watch my back.
He just makes like ninja sounds like the whole class. It's hilarious.
That's beautiful.
Let's see an AI do that.
Right.
All right, guys. Well, I think that was a pretty great first episode back. A lot of fun discussing all of that with you. Thank you to everyone who stopped by, and excited to have these more regularly once again. Like I said, we'll be back every 2 weeks, just like we were before. So thank you, everybody, and persist forever.
Persist forever.
Hey guys, it's good to be
Persist
back.
forever.
Bye, everyone.
Guys.
Forever.